But it's through God that we will be fulfilled. And it is Jesus' strength that changes our hearts. For those people who are not lacking in the Spirit, it's far harder for us to admit that we need God's help and we need his Spirit. Verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. The response to sin of those who recognize their need for God and God's salvation is mourning. They mourn for the sin of this world, the sin that's within them. They mourn for the lack of righteousness in themselves and the world. The people who don't just ignore the lack of righteousness, and instead, those who see it and grieve it and realize the reality of our broken world, those are the people that Jesus is blessing. The Sadducees, who were all about going with the flow, would have ignored the travesties of their day, would have ignored the fact that there is sin around them, and just kept going with the flow. They were very much about status quo and keeping going. But Jesus says, the kingdom values the opposite of that ignorance of the world's brokenness. He values the recognition of it. Verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Those who are meek are gentle. Let's think about this in terms of a person who is recognizing the brokenness of the world and grieving in it. What can be your reactions to that? Your reactions can be anger, it can be, again, you could ignore the brokenness of the world. But Jesus, and especially, we're going to talk about anger here specifically, when you recognize the brokenness of the world, and those people who recognize the brokenness of the world, when they act in gentleness and kindness towards it, towards the people who are broken, towards themselves when they are broken, that is the value that Jesus is talking about right here, is that meekness in the instance of recognizing the brokenness of the world. Love and kindness instead of anger and aggression. Let's think about the Zealots. Like, they were the fighters. They wanted to fight for God's kingdom, and they wanted Jesus to be their fighting king. And Jesus is very clearly saying, hey, the kingdom values gentleness and kindness. We so often choose sides and then tend to be mean and aggressive towards the other side. God blesses those with a spirit of gentleness, even when we're being oppressed or opposed from the opposite side. Verses 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. When do you hunger for something? Are you generally hungry when you just got on the couch after Thanksgiving and you're stuffed and you just ate a really big meal? No. When are you hungry? The hours leading up to Thanksgiving, maybe? You know, when you can smell the turkey in the oven and you're anticipating that meal, that's when you're hungry for it and you don't have it yet. So let's think about that. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, those who see the lack of righteousness in the world and hunger for Jesus to bring it to the world, to bring his kingdom to the world. Think about the Essenes here and their reaction to this. They were hoping for the long-awaited Messiah to remove them from this world and take them away. But the kingdom will bring righteousness to the world. And the value is to bring righteousness and to mourn and to seek that righteousness in this world, but not to run away from it. Verses 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. The Lord values a merciful heart. In those moments of seeing the bitterness of the world, again, the meekness kind of ties into this. There's a gentle heart to those broken, and to yourself while you're broken too. When we talk about the world, we're talking about all of us here. But the Lord values a merciful heart because the reality is that we're broken and we need God's grace. And we need a heart that's not rigid, kind of like how the Pharisees looked at the law as a very rigid, they took a rigid heart posture towards people because of the law, because of how they interpreted it rigidly. Verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall be called sons of God. The people who don't care about worldly values, those that have pure intent, but care about, and specifically care about seeing God and knowing him personally and want a heart like Jesus. Those with pure intentions towards God, these are the people that Jesus is talking about here who are blessed. This pure heart towards God and his kingdom. Verses 9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. As you look out at the lack of righteousness in the world, there are people in conflict, right? There's conflict in your own heart. Blessed are those who follow Jesus and become peacemakers, especially in that conflict. The people who insert themselves into a conflict between two parties and decide to love both parties and to bring peace to it. What happens when you insert yourself into conflict? A lot of times, you get attacked from both sides. In the next verse, Jesus says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So when you do seek peace, and you do seek that righteousness, and you're attacked by both sides, Jesus says that yours is the kingdom of heaven. You are valued in the kingdom of God as you seek peace and stand up for righteousness. Jesus reiterates this in the next verses 11 and 12. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. We will be persecuted even when we stand up for all these values of the kingdom of God. And we will be falsely persecuted because we stand for this righteousness and for God's righteousness. Jesus is speaking the truth, kind of like we talked about last week. He's speaking the truth of the kingdom and showing us that it's upside down from what the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Zealots, or the Essenes valued. It's upside down from what we value in our society. He shows us that the kingdom has differing values from the world. Jesus is inviting us to the kingdom with this new heart posture. He invites us to be humble and loving, to be peacemakers rather than being combative, to seek righteousness rather than worldly justice, to engage with the world and mourn for its brokenness rather than ignore it, to be merciful rather than rigid. He invites us to the kingdom that is in opposition to our values in society.